Now that we know that the spot healing brush just kind of works based off of where you're painting, let's take a look at a situation where you may need to apply surrounding textures, but you don't necessarily want to blend them in. For example, remember when we did the spot healing brush on this rose, we have this kind of blurry area in here. Well, I guess it's not a rose. This poppy, this flower, we have this blurry area that occurred instead. So what you could do is create a layer, go to your stamp tool, and then open up your stamp tool and tell it to sample all layers and do an alt click, and then, you know, set the brush to be a softer hardness, but you have all of your brushes this time, so you can in fact pull up your crazy stuff like your snail and everything and be happy with it. But you sit here, you're trying to paint in pieces so that it looks a little more natural, but it's kind of painstaking, even on a blurry image like this, simply because you're having to go back in and try to line things up, and you're just hoping for the best, and you know you're going to have to keep going in and working at it for a long time. So what you really need is something in between the two. And what's between the stamp tool and the spot healing brush? The healing brush. So unlike the spot healing brush, I'm going to create a new layer, we have the ability to click, and I'm going to do something mysterious for just a second. You have the ability to alt click, and then you have the same tools that you have via clone source that you would with your stamp tool. And this is a time that I like to see the overlay. But when you paste stuff down, it tries to blend it together. And so I could alt click and just paint up, but you can see that it's still, the edges are still a little hard going in. Sometimes that's appropriate, and sometimes that's not. That looks a little phony. Well, that's adjustable by using something called diffusion. Diffusion, right here, allows me to either blur it more or blur it less. And at this point, it will almost be like the stamp tool, except it tries to do a blending effect through it. So let's see what it would look like from the get-go without the spot healing brush, and we just use the standard healing brush tool instead. So I take a blurry area and I try to paint over it. It's too hard. I go ahead and increase the diffusion. Oh, that's doing a better job, but we're getting some reds because it's trying to preserve a chunk of it. And that's why it's useful to actually use something like a content aware fill first, and then you can see you can paint straight in. Now there's another option in here, and that's called use legacy. Now this is a little bit different. This is more in lines of what a lot of people who used Photoshop earlier are used to. It's essentially like a diffusion of 3, but it has a better color blend in my opinion. It's not as mushy for it. And so if you play with it, you'll get the feel that it does wipe stuff out a little bit faster. So you can do some cool stuff where you actually come in with the legacy mode first. Whoa, but be careful when you go from brights to darks in legacy mode. I'm going to alt click and then I'm going to drag down so you can blur away a lot of stuff. And then once you've blurred away a lot of stuff, you can actually come in with the spot healing tool, crank that bad boy up, and I missed spot healing. Can I please get that? Thank you. Spot healing brush. And then I'm going to go ahead and do a content aware. No, I'm going to do a proximity match. No, yeah, content aware. And click. And it should do a better job this time of patching it up. Now we still have some red, but a couple more clicks and then it'll start to fade away. Then you can come back with, instead of the spot healing brush, the healing brush tool again, and start, and I'm just using the left and right bracket keys to increase and decrease the size, and start painting in everything once the color's kind of taken care of. But once you're done with the major cover up, turn off legacy mode and use the standard diffusion tools to kind of bring things back in as you need to. Now keep in mind that this does in fact use the clone source, and you can tell that because you have the clone source button right here. If we toggle over to our spot healing brush, you'll notice no clone source button available. We just have the ability to change it to replace instead of normal. Let me click and hold, go back to the healing brush. We have the clone source, which means that we in fact have the same controls as before. And let me use the right bracket key to make this nice and big so you can see this. Let me alt click so you can see the sample. Holding down Alt and Shift will again affect everything the way that it did before. So if I use the less than or greater than, you can see the degrees increasing and decreasing. If I hold down Alt Shift and use the left and right bracket keys, you can see the width and height increasing and decreasing. Let's see if the arrow keys will work on this one. No, the left and right arrow keys do not work on this one. I must check to make sure that I'm up to date on this software. Watch me click. Boom. And it tries to blend everything together. It will do sometimes a better job than other times. Your goal is to try to keep it looking realistic. Well, in most cases. Sometimes you want to create nightmare creatures like we were doing here. Isn't that awful? I should have gotten rid of that. Now, here's something I haven't tried. Will it work across sampled layers? It will. Now that is powerful, and I don't know what version this started working in, but that means that you can actually go to a previous image and take a sample using your healing brush and then pop on over somewhere else and paint that sample in, and it will try to blend everything together. Well, that's fascinating. Guys, gals, I just learned something new. Isn't this great? That's crazy. One other thing that is very important, you also have the ability to align it as before, just with the stamp tool. You have the ability to use all layers, current layer below. I'm assuming if we do current layer, it will still function. Sure enough, it will still function. That's amazing to me. I didn't know that you could break across like that, which is especially nice. Look at that. It has the information as to where it is. Don't forget, you can set different clone sources. So you can set a clone source for 4 different images plus one that you're working on. So I guess 5 total. And that should not be the case using the spot healing brush, because you cannot alt click. Now that we've experimented with this, though, I'd like to add an addendum. I am 90% sure we can use the, yes, standard stamp tool across layers. Well, that's brilliant. I wish I'd known that earlier. It would have saved me some time. So that said, that's about all that there is to the healing brush tool. Really great thing if you need to do blending. You have control over the diffusion. That is how soft the edges blend and the overall effect. At 1, it's the lowest. At 7, I believe, it's the highest. And you also still have your legacy mode, which is what's available in older versions of Photoshop. There's also pattern. This will blend in a pattern, which is great because we're going to be creating patterns and try to add that pattern to wherever you are. So if you've made some horrible monster, for example, you could come in and add a texture to it, which makes everything considerably worse. All right. So from here, we'll explore the next step. What if you want a big area without using a brush? That's what the patch tool is for. So next up, patch tool. See you in a minute.